My name is Bill Mousoulis, and I, together with Chris Luscri, who's not here tonight, run this series called Unknown Pleasures, of which this screening is part of. And we basically try to screen films that haven't been screened much or that are undervalued. And tonight's film has had a screening or two. Sorry, before I say all that, I just want to say thanks for coming. And there's a few people who are sick, so the sold out isn't quite completely full. And thanks to the venue for allowing us to screen these type of more alternative films. And also I want to thank the traditional owners of this land for allowing us to live, work and play here after 250 years of abuse against them. So my respects to the Wurundjeri people and my love and solidarity with all Indigenous people. Now, back to tonight's film. John Flaus is a figure who obviously you all know, and it's his 90th birthday tomorrow. He's not able to be here. He's in an aged care place and he's got Alzheimer's. He attended a few screenings with us here last year and was very sprightly and was part of the Q&As. In fact, he was one of the Q&A subjects at one screening. And this film is directed by Peter Tammer, who is a very inventive documentary filmmaker. I'll say a bit more about him with the Q&A at the end. And this film was shot primarily in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, and edited at the time, sort of mostly edited, but then it didn't get funding for completion. And then the editing was complete in 2009 with the editor Kit Guyatt helping Peter. Kit is a filmmaker in his own right and actually has edited quite a few films, some classics in the 70s and 80s, like My Survival as an Aboriginal and Amelia Rose Towers, and a few kind of really fantastic films. And so, yeah, we won't have them introduce anything now. We'll get on with it. And, yeah, we'll have a Q&A with them at the end. So I hope you enjoy it. Yeah. Firstly, on the restoration, come on through, Kit. Like the high-def enhancement that Peter himself has done on the film recently has really brought it to life, I think, and not that it was lacking life beforehand. Overall, it's just such a unusual, fast-paced. I like to call it a swirling matrix of little bits and pieces. And also, Kit, thank you. You've come from New South Wales. You've driven from New South Wales to be with us.
Trained.
You trained it?
Trained it, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. But yeah, thanks for that. So, Peter, you first met Flausy in the late 60s.
Yeah, if we can blame Kit for that, because I was up in Sydney and working with the Commonwealth Film Unit where we met, and Kit was involved with the anti-war movement during the 60s, the Vietnam War, and Monique and I went to Sydney and we took the Breath of Fresh Air program with us, and I wanted to put, Kit had a press that could print pamphlets, and so we put our poster, our program through Kit's little press. We all went down to the Sydney Union to put that up on the boards at the Sydney Union, and who was coming down the stairs but John Flaus, whom I'd never met. And Kit introduced me to John Flaus, so it's all his fault.
That's the connections in cinema.
I didn't have anything much to do with Flaus in Sydney, but while I was working at the film unit, there was an association called Workers' Education Association, and they showed films every week or fortnight or something like that, and they had guest speakers. And I went to a couple where Flaus spoke, and I was astonished by the incredible breadth of his knowledge of cinema and his way of looking at films, his way of dissecting films, bringing together a whole lot of views of film, from the sociological to the political to the structural in storytelling. I've never heard anyone speak with the authority and with the clarity that he spoke about some of the films he showed there. Anyhow, I lost contact with him and I came back to Melbourne, and we were living in North Carlton. Luke was born, and I came back from a trip from Indonesia, and I finished a few films, and we showed them at the original Melbourne Filmmakers Co-op in Spring Street. And one day I was in Canning Street, North Carlton, when who's coming down the street but John Flaus, who's coming down from Laurie Clancy's place. Laurie lived up the road from us in North Carlton. And I invited Flaus along to some of our film co-op screenings, and he came along and met us during one of the seasons we had there, and we showed, it wasn't actually for one of the evening screenings, but we showed him some experimental films that were being promoted by the Melbourne Filmmakers Co-op. And he took to them like a duck to water, and I was really surprised because I didn't know that he would be able to respond to experimental and poetic short films that were challenging in the same way that he could respond to a conventional feature film. But he took to it really well, and our association grew from there. Is that
incredible? No, that's great. And as time went along, then another 10 years, early to mid 80s. When did you have the idea that you wanted to do a portrait of him?
Well, it grew, and I was teaching at Swinburne, and I was teaching a number of the people who appear in this film. I was hoping some of them would be here tonight, like some of the ones who gave us the rights to their films, like Harry Comes Home, by Ian. Come on, I'm having name dropouts here, and Clayton. And Clayton Jacobson for To One's Own Heart Be True, and Ray Bosley for the one where the
nuclear bomb,
the nuclear bomb scene in the end, and others. And I introduced Flaus to those people because I had been teaching a subject called History of Cinema there, and I knew that it was something that Flaus could do a million times better than I could do. So I got him to come and teach History of Cinema. And he became sort of an institution amongst the students at that time, as well as lending himself to all their films as an actor. So it was at that time, in let's say approaching, I started applying for the grant for the film in 1987. So that's approximately the time. I think I would have had the idea of making the film maybe 1 year before I applied for the grant.
Did you have great foresight? Like you thought, I've got to capture this man in his element, in a verite style?
No, I didn't feel it like that. Yeah. I felt it like I just wanted to celebrate the extraordinary person that he is. It's like it wasn't like I feel I must do this. It was like I just want to do this. It was an urge to do something to celebrate his intelligence and his commitment and passion to film.
Yeah, absolutely. And so by that point, you'd already done quite a few of your films, actually, in the 70s, a lot of documentaries. You've always had a particular style with your documentary making where it's not conventional, obviously. It's quite direct, and sometimes it's actually more interesting than that, like with Journey to the End of Night. So with this film, I guess you felt that the structure, that like a kind of cryptic crossword, rolling matrix of all these elements was the thing you thought.
Well, it was a combination of a number of things. I've always been drawn towards observational cinema. I think that started with my very first films, and then with the cryptic crosswords, I actually had that idea in the application I made for making the film. when I approached the creative development branch. But I didn't use the word, like some of the words you used to describe my interest. I used the word mosaic structure, and I was thinking of cross-referential things, and so therefore cryptic crosswords are cross-referential, like all crosswords. Other crosswords are not necessarily cross-referential, but cryptics are. And the other thing is, when you think about the mosaic structure or the cryptic crossword, another thing that came into my mind was the notion of a quilt, a patchwork quilt. And I had a thing where I felt that if someone was making a patchwork quilt, it could be really plain and you could just have patterns that had no relativity to each other. But there were also patchwork quilts that I saw in that period of my life that were made by quilt makers of distinction, where they paid a lot of attention to how one colour would be associated with another colour in another part of the quilt. So that the squares that they were joining up might have some context to the next square or the one beyond that. So that was in my mind too. But of course, everything that I got in the film came out of my experience getting to know John better as I made the film, but also because we had things like, in our library at Swinburne, we had things like the AFTRS tapes in which he did those direct-to-camera observations about filmmaking and film history and everything. And also that, what particularly drew me to those was that first of all, that they were so stilted in the way they were set up, so corny in the setups. They were very poor quality. They were pneumatic tapes, but he was able to express in simple statements, all these ideas like that a person might represent a philosophy of which they were unaware. And then I, of course, was able to use that in the film in a reflective way. So does that help you with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's all those kind of connections in the film constantly. It's like with each cryptic crossword answer, that section refers to it.
Yeah.
You do spend, you do feature quite a lot of clips of his acting, and
Yeah.
for me, I kind of see. I mean, he plays the macho roles, but then also the vulnerability is there in some of them, and for me, that there's somehow a correlation between that and him as a person being like supremely intellectual and encyclopedic in his abilities, and yet also so down to earth.
Yeah.
He's got this amazing combination of things, and I think that is so unusual, and a lot of people were drawn to him because of that. Sorry, no specific question there, but with the editing, I understand Kit came along just for the second phase of editing.
No, let me express that and let Kit take it from there. We had the film was made in two parts. There was a period from 1987 to 1987 to 1992. We'll call that phase one. And then I couldn't get any money from the AFC to finish the film. They put restrictions upon me, like wanting me to cut the film in half. They wanted me to get rid of all the international footage so that they could save on paying the rights in the budget. And they wanted me to put in a budget for $25,000 of marketing for a film I didn't want to finish, in their film. And so I gave it away. I had some showings at Work in Progress at the Melbourne Film Festival that Tate Brady helped us set up. That was presented at the State Film Centre, and we had a showing for the AFC and Film Victoria to try and get some finishing money. So then I got Kit to come down before all that happened and be the editor on that first stage after I'd been shooting it for a few years, right? Kit came down and he worked with me in Melbourne while I was on study leave, and then I went back to teach again, and he was working on the film while I was teaching at Swinney. And then around about 2004 or 5, I got the idea that I really wanted to finish the film. I didn't want to leave it in a state of incompleteness as we had left it. So we started it up again, and we had a lot of toing and froing between me going up to see Kit and Kit coming down to stay with me and working on the film that way. So now I'm handing it over to Kit, and he can talk about editing.
I don't know whether there's much left to say.
No, you can
Tammer's
start.
pretty well covered it. But if I can go back a step, Bill, I first met John Flaus in probably about 1965. I wasn't working in film, and I didn't know anything about Flaus's interest in film. In fact, we met in a sort of cellar in eastern Sydney, where we were both members of a sort of anarchist discussion group, and we threw around anarchist ideas and philosophies and so on. And that was my first meeting with Flaus, and then later on I came to work in film and realised how much Flaus had to contribute in that area. I don't know what else I can say about the editing. I think Peter's pretty well summed that up.
Who did what? I mean, you're obviously editing in conjunction with the director and his instructions, but you must have brought a lot of ideas to that as well.
Well, I like to think I've had something. Yeah, I've always, as an editor, always believed that you work to a director and contribute what you can within the context of that the director has defined. I think looking at the film tonight, which I haven't seen for quite a while.
15 years.
Tammer tells me it's 15 years.
2009.
I can't possibly time have gone that. Can that happen?
And you never saw it with a live audience before, so it would be actually very nice to hear what you have to say about how the film looks to you 15 years after we wrapped it up.
I'm not ashamed to be here. I think it hangs together pretty well. It was nice to get some appreciative chuckles at the right moments from you, the audience, and it was also gratifying to hear some people get the cryptic crossword clues and solutions. Possibly my most painstaking contribution was putting the cryptic crossword bits together, which was all frame by frame
selling
animation.
Yourself short.
Well, I said I'd give you back the mic in a minute.
Right.
But the cryptic crosswords were done the very old-fashioned way, frame by frame animation. Once I worked out how the letters were going to finally fit together, then I had to start from the beginning.
And the cryptic crossword was devised by Flaus.
They were all designed by Flaus, yes.
Yeah.
And more. We had
more, but
we had more and more cryptic crossword clues and solutions from Flaus.
So let me fill in on what Kit didn't tell you about. I introduced him to a rough cut of the film, right? In 1990, what I had was a rough assembly of the film, the concept of the film, and it was loose and it was vague and it had lots of potential for fine cutting and rearrangement. And then I handed it over to Kit and he took it on, and we had a very strong collaborative thing where he would show me something and I would approve of it because it made sense what he... We didn't have a difficult antagonistic relationship in the editing, and I had Kit help me on Malakuta Stampede, and he had saved Malakuta Stampede for me, so I had a lot of trust that he would do the same on the Flaus film. But it was collaborative in both the first editing stage and in the second editing stage, and it's probably best to say that we had a team-like approach to the editing, but he did the hard work on it.
And also for me, like, the editing is so razor sharp, and sometimes you do the cheating thing of, like, you put one shot next to the other, but it didn't really come there in the sequence. Like when he and Natalie are in the car talking and eating, and we can see it's not the exact. You didn't have 3 different cameras running at the same time, so there's a lot of really clever and sharp editing in there. And just like the pace of the film is so incredible, and you both obviously were very...
It got sharper as he was editing, right? It was incredibly loose when I gave it to Kit.
Yeah.
Bill, can I just say one last thing? I think what pleased me most about seeing the film tonight for the first time in 15 years, Tammer tells me, if I can believe that, is that it does seem to embody the nature of Flaus, his wide interest, his sharp wit, his ability to move from one subject or thought to another. And I was quite pleased to feel, I hope others might agree with me, that the film sort of captured that spirit and essence of Flaus in some way, a bit.
Can we ask people to give us, if you feel like making any contribution in terms of how you reacted to the film and its style and its content?
You can speak into the mic,
Absolutely.
or you can speak out loud if anyone's got any comments or questions.
Stunned mullets.
Any reaction whatsoever? We've got a hand up the back. Bill.
Yeah, it's Jen here. I've seen John on the poetry circuit, and I was particularly enjoying his long rendition of that poem, fairly early-ish.
Which
I
poem?
wondered what that poem was.
Can you tell me which scene you're talking about? The one about the unicorn, or?
Yeah.
Okay, that was, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the poem, but it was presented on he used to do sessions on 3RRR for on poetry like that. So it was one of those sessions which I got, and I just loved that poem. I don't recall the title of the poem or the poet, his name, but I really loved the way Flaus read that. Beautiful piece. And the other one that I liked very much was when he read the snippets from Keats's Ode to the Nightingale, pouring forth thy song. And that was given to me by a student who had edited the whole poem down to about 8 or 10 lines. And I just said to John in his kitchen, what do you think of this? And he read it with that extraordinary quality. And even though the lines had been truncated from the poem of, say, 2 pages length down to one stanza, it all made sense. And then, of course, the way we've edited the film, it flows on into the next scenes of him being acupunctured and all that sort of stuff. So I really like that very much. But he has the voice for that. He has the gift of an incredible voice, a vocal range.
Yeah, he's very much the fine wine, isn't he? And it's wonderful to have a documentary to savour, having missed out all those years ago, to appreciate the wonder of his voice and his thoughts and his character, and so many great snippets of fantastic, funny films. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Real quick.
Yes, Ivan.
Well, I remember one part when Paul Harris interviewed John.
Yeah, you enjoyed that?
Are they still friends?
I think they are, Ivan.
Well, actually, I like that part of the film because it's sort of the audience would have thought what probably Paul was saying, about the whole film.
John was very hurt by Paul being antagonistic to him on that level. I don't mean on just that one day, but in that period, I know John was thinking of cutting out from being involved in the program any longer. And it was coming to an end. And I think it came to an end of him appearing in the program in tandem with Paul. That came to an end sometime about a few months after I shot that scene. Not immediately. Okay?
Another thing is that maybe I have a old-fashioned idea about filmmaking. Someone said it somewhere, I don't know where, that filmmaking is making order out of disorder.
Yes.
In a conventional
and we're
way.
doing the opposite.
So I took time for me to settle down and actually take your style over and go with it. Okay, very good.
We had a few comments during the editing phase from people who wanted a clearer definition and more of a beginning to end structure and explanation as to who Flaus was and what he was about. So your comment is not unexpected, but I think in the end we thought that this sort of not random interconnections, but mosaic pattern, I think
Yeah.
was the word Peter used, that fitted better with Flaus's life and personality and spirit.
So you were aware of it?
Sorry?
You were aware of it?
Oh, yes.
Very much so. It was deliberate.
Like from the very first concept of the film was that it was never going to be a through-line film. I never had that idea of making a through-line film where time was sequential from beginning to end, as in a storytelling. And by the way, when you're making a film like this, and you're making it on a very low budget, and you've only got a couple of people you're working with. For example, Mark Davis was mainly my sound recordist, and so and then Jock Healy was also my sound recordist for some scenes that were very important scenes, and Fiona Egger was the production managing person, and with a small crew like that, with all the work that had to be done, and it was done on a piecemeal basis because I was teaching full time. All through. I was working at Swinburne 5 days a week, all through the shooting and the editing of the film in the first stage. You know, so it has to be serendipitous and happenstance rather than incredibly organised. I'll give you one example of that. You remember the scene where he's talking about reading from James Joyce for the Bloomsday, reading in the poetry bookstore? That was done during a weekday while I was teaching, and I had to get permission to get away from Swinburne to film John doing his Bloomsday reading. And if I missed it, I have to wait till the next year or the year after to have another opportunity. So I met Mark Davis outside the Chris Hemmingsley's bookshop in Little Collins Street or something like that on a rainy weekday morning, and we had to carry our equipment upstairs and film this scene and back again, and I'm back to work at Swinburne at lunchtime. I don't know how we got the scene. I don't know how we survived that.
I think the other aspect of that was if you started at the beginning of Flaus's life and looked at all his work and all his ideas, it'd be a mini-series, or it might be a maxi-series.
And just think of all the
It wouldn't
films.
be a 100-minute film.
Just think of all the films he was in that we haven't referred to.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one story from that. Thanks, Kit. One story that I think is wonderful about Flaus. He worked for my students and for other students that were not my direct students at Swinburne, and he gave them their time no matter how badly they treated him. And one day he told me that he'd been to a location that he was meant to be on call for 10 o'clock in the morning and nobody turned up, and nobody had told Flaus that the shoot was cancelled. You might think that's pretty bad. I thought that was pretty bad, but here's a better one. They were filming in a country place down near your lawn. I can't remember exactly where, but it was in East Gippsland. And some of my very wild students of that year left him chained to a tree while they went off for a counter lunch in the winter.
It was easier rather than set him up again.
I think they were just trying him out to see how far they could take him. I don't think they forgot he was there. Not for a minute. They were not that sort of people. It was deliberate. Anyhow, he still went along with them. He still filmed for them.
No, a man of remarkable generosity and big-spirited person in every regard.
More questions?
Kevin?
Yeah. Kevin?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Peter, when was the first time you worked with John?
When I worked with him was in, I started teaching at Swinburne. I started teaching at. Sorry, I started teaching part-time in 77 and 78, and then I was on full-time from 79. So I didn't bring Flaus into the history of cinema thing until about 1980.
No, sorry, I meant on a film basis. What was the first thing that you worked with John on cinema-wise? Or have you worked with him cinema-wise?
No, I had not. I don't recall working with him as him being an actor in a film that I was associated with.
There's Blood Money where you appear.
Oh, all right. Well, I didn't get where you were going with that. Okay, in Blood Money, which was made, I think, around about 1984 or something like that, that was my first association working with Flaus, and I was roped in as an actor there, and I really enjoyed the opportunity, but I don't like looking at the results now. I've got a good one for you out of that. All right. When Flaus goes into the office and gets Michael Carmen out of the office and throws him down in front of me with the shotgun, I'm there surrounded by the film crew, and I'm meant to be an actor, and I've got no actor's training at all, right? And Flaus comes out, and if he moves, kill him, right? And I started laughing in the middle of I fell apart because I'd never faced that intensity from Flaus as a person before. It was just such a surprise. I just fell to pieces. Anyhow, I had to find my way back into that and do a couple of takes to get a little bit of confidence to face that.
That's why they had to write him out of the film by
Anyway,
murdering
they got
him
me
at
out
that
of the
early
film
stage.
very quickly after that, you know. Any more questions, please? Yes?
Very good film, well threaded together. And Yakety Yak, the black and white one, who made that?
That was Dave Jones and the guys who were out at La Trobe University at the time, including people like Rod Bishop and Gordon Glenn and Peter Bilby, that crew that made Beginnings before they made back Yakety Yak. By the way, I really loved their film Beginnings, and because Flaus is not involved with that, he couldn't be part of this. That couldn't be part of this film.
When was Yakety Yak made? What year was that made?
Yakety Yak was made in the early
72, shot in 72,
Shot in 72.
and edited in 74.
You don't
So-
mention Maidstone, you don't think I thought I heard Maidstone.
That was the Norman Mailer one, yeah.
I mentioned that, Alan.
There's mention
Any-
of Norman Mailer in the film.
Keep going.
Well,
There's passing reference to him.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
There's passing reference to Norman Mailer.
Yes, but that was only that was in the Yakety Yak, but I don't know. I think Maidstone was a couple of years before Yakety Yak. I think probably 70 rather than 74. I'm only guessing now.
We've got Nigel Buist here. Who,
Hello, Nigel.
At the back. There was a story John told on Film Buff's forecast. I think I've got this right. Some students were remaking Sunset Boulevard, and they went out to a swimming pool at Montsalvat in Eltham. And John was determined when he gets shot and falls into the pool that he would stay down long enough that the ripples would all subside. And so Gloria Swanson shot him, and he plunged to the depths of this swimming pool, clutching 2 bricks to make sure he stayed down. And he'd taken a deep breath, and he's intended to be underwater for 30 seconds. Anyway, the crew were unfamiliar with deaths on screen, and they all jumped in to rescue him. They thought he'd had a heart attack, and unless he was dragged out, he'd drown.
He would be there forever.
But this was his commitment to
I hadn't
family.
heard that one before, Nigel. Well, thank you for that.
So, on the other magic moment in the film, which was very short, Ray Bosley had this skeleton, and John says, "Is this how the world ends?"
Yeah.
And his face falls apart.
Yeah.
That was magical.
That comes out of Ray Bosley's film that Ray made that film called Smoke 'Em If You've Got 'Em, but he didn't make it while he was a Swinney student. It was the year after or 2 years after he was a Swinburne student. So, and by the way, this gives me a chance to say thank you to people like Ray and Clayton and Ian Mackay and Jock Hilly and all the people who contributed to the film. Even the ones who were involved in shooting at Pat Longmore's pub, the shaving sequence. They were first year students using the ordinary pneumatic stuff that we had at Swinburne, which was really primitive gear, and they did a damn good job of that. But I had to resuscitate it a lot in the topazing that I've done on the film, because it was full of raster lines, the interlacing lines, and I'm really pleased about how it's come up. And I was telling Kit yesterday and today about how I was really pleased with some of the material I got out of my little Telefunken camcorder that I had at the time. So in 1985, I went to America and I bought this Telefunken camcorder before I went there, and it had the 30-minute cassettes that you could get.
This is a VHS camera,
VHS
to a VHS-C.
And I used it in my study leave in America and filmed in editing places to show what the new editing techniques were coming from, or technology was coming from, to lead towards digital editing that was still coming to Australia then and hadn't arrived. And then I started using that camcorder, to film Flaus in things like the acting thing at the beginning of the film, where he's called an elderly actor and that, and he's putting on the makeup for the play. And I used it with Flaus in his kitchen when he does the anarchist, the mellow anarchist routine, and where he does the one about the poem, that's Keats's poem, and that. And the other scene I loved that I got with that camcorder was the one where Flaus is railing against the Australian films, and he finds them shameful, and that these people have pride in the shitty work they're doing. And I got that on that little Telefunken camcorder, and I think it stands up as well as anything I got on an Arri SR in the film.
I think it's, Peter might correct me here, but I think it's true to say that not 1 cent of the budget was spent on royalty payments.
Not a cent. Not 1 cent.
So that all the student films and other films that we see Flaus appearing in did not cost the meagre budget anything at all, which I think is a sign of great generosity on the part of those filmmakers.
And I've got one little analogue, one little addition to that, Kit, and that is that I wanted to use a sequence, which Kit is familiar with, out of Hiller's film, Out of Towners. So I'll summarise it quickly. Flaus is sitting there playing computer chess with himself, trying to light a fag and watching Jack Lemmon and Sandy Dennis in Out of Towners. And I made a 4-minute sequence out of it. And that 4-minute sequence had 4 minutes of audio and 1 minute of 1 minute of imagery other than Flaus. Only 1 minute of imagery. And when I was asking for money from the AFC to include rights for getting the international footage and that, we approached them for the rights to that footage. $25,000 for 4 minutes, including 1 minute of image.
So the Hollywood producers were nothing like as generous as the Australian filmmakers who
So
did end up
the
chipping
Indians.
in.
So that scene's not in the film.
What about the ones you used? How much did they cost?
We never paid a cent, so don't tell anyone.
You anarchist. Just 1 or 2 more questions. Yep. I'll give you a mic. Can you introduce yourself, maybe, your name?
I'm Gordon.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi, Peter. I wanted to ask about the way that you intercut the John Ford cavalry film with Henry Fonda and
Queensland.
Queensland. Yeah.
Yep.
There was obviously some parallel going on. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Okay, so it's about John being in one film. First of all, he loves the films of John Ford, and he put me onto Fort Apache, and I was going to do much more with the Searchers than I was going to do with Fort Apache. But when we couldn't get the rights to the Searchers, we more or less gave up on it, except we pinched the Comanche, shooting the eyes out of the dead Comanche, so he's wandering forever in the winds, right? Mm-hmm. But I fell in love with Fort Apache, and I saw it as a parallel to the story of Orb and Doug in Queensland. Okay. And it's about contradictions between the two characters. It's about loyalty and disloyalty, and it's about not understanding all the parameters. Like, say, for example, Henry Fonda's character as the Major is not concerned at all with any ethical values such as betraying the Indians' trust or something like that. He's only interested in doing the colonial thing of getting the Indians under control for the Union. And between John and the woman in Queensland, whose name I've forgotten, and Orb, it's all about loyalties to each other rather than to a system. It's not like a system of military system or national state system or colonial system or something like that. So, but it's, does that help with
Yeah, it does. That's fine. Thank you. Second quick
But
question.
then it was also juxtaposed against everything that was happening with John and Natalie on the move. And John and Natalie on the move went through an enormous amount of tension. And that day when they were finishing up with the books in the study, I had to leave the shoot because I knew that I was stopping them getting their packing done to meet the packages coming to the movers coming to take all the packages away the next day. And Natalie got very sick because of all the tension that was building up in that room that day. So that was also juxtaposed against John in Queensland and the tension in the Fort Apache staff.
Yeah, I love that parallel with, with Alison Bird in the bed, where John is doing all the talking.
Yeah, and she's fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, her performance in that film is one of the best performances in the Australian films.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly also ask, is there a listing anywhere that you've got, like footnotes to identify all the films?
If anyone wants to take up and do some work for us, I'll give them the work to do.
Thank you.
Are you offering? Are you volunteering?
Yeah, possibly. Let me think about it.
Thank you, Gordon.
Just one last quick question from anyone. Jake. Oh, Jake.
First, just, it's a wonderful film. It's so many great things and so many surprises, and you never know what's coming next.
Thank you. Who are you?
My name's Jake.
Oh,
Wilson.
hello, Jake.
Nice to speak to you. My question was, how did he feel when you approached him about making this film? And
He was keen. He never had any problems about it. He knew what I wanted to do, and he knew what because I was going for a grant, which I got $51,000 to take it to Doublehead Stage, right? And so that carried me through from 87 to 92, right? Because he knew I was going for a grant, I had to write synopses and treatments and everything to convince the assessors for giving out the grants at that time, which, by the way, have all disappeared in our time, all right? There's none of them around anymore for anybody, so I hope you're not looking at getting grants from any government organisations these days. But John would have read everything I wrote about the applications at the time. Everything I wrote for the applications, he was party to.
So I have a quick follow-up question.
Yes, please.
How did John feel about on his viewing of the finished film?
No, he liked the film, or he told me he liked the film, but John and I had some difficulties at the end of the film that had to do with him thinking that I had let him down with the cryptic crosswords. And what I mean by about that is that he had one or two cryptic crosswords that he said he could never have given permission to that wordage. And I had it on emails from 2 years before that he had written that wordage. So we had an argument about that, and things were going wrong in his life at that time. I think one of his daughters was sick with cancer. And so we had a little bit of a dicey end to the film before we cut it till we stopped editing in 2009. But it was like his concern about what he didn't like in the film came down to one word on each of two cryptic crosswords in the clue.
Other than that, fairly positive. Very positive.
And yet, okay, come on, yep.
The footage, the early Sydney push.
Can you please speak up a bit?
My name's Jim Bridges. The early
American Poet's Visit footage.
The American Poet's Visit. That was a film made by Michael Thornhill. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Mike Thornhill is someone I knew from my days when I worked at Eltham Films with Tim Burstall and Pat Ryan. And Mike Thornhill edited with Alan Hargraves and Tim Burstall on work before I got to Eltham Films. And I met Mike when he was in Melbourne a couple of times, and then I stayed with him up in Sydney when I went to Sydney to work on Eltham Films up there, when we were going to laboratories and stuff up in Sydney for the Eltham Films art series and Sebastian series that were being made in Melbourne.
Sebastian the Fox.
Yeah, Sebastian the Fox. Anyhow, so I knew Mike from those days, and I saw American Poets Visit. When it came out, we had it at the Co-op. So I knew the film existed, and then when I was making the Flaus film, I really knew I wanted to use some snippets from that film, and Mike gave me the permission to use it without any trouble at all.
Cinematheque showed it on his
Can't hear you.
birthday. Cinematheque showed that film on John's 80th birthday.
Oh, okay, right. Anyhow, so it was a great pleasure that, the people were so generous with giving me the rights to their films, like John Ruane and Chris Fitchett and many others, right? And the other thing that I really loved was being able to get onto the ads that we got in the film. I don't know how we got the rights. I have to give Fiona Egger an incredible vote of thanks for the work she put in during that first phase.
Advertisers are usually pretty keen to get some more airplay.
But it's not easy to track them down and get the permission, because the ad agencies change between the time that you're going for them and the time you use them.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's
We'll
enough.
have to wrap it up. But thank you, everyone. Thanks, Peter and Kit.
Thank you, Kit. You did very well. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Bill, for your support.
Yeah.
You're welcome, Peter.
And